The year hadn't even started yet. But there we were, all of us, circuiting the halls, looking in classrooms and down corridors. It was an exciting time. We had just finished 5th grade with all the little kids at elementary school before we were starting with the big kids in middle school. But before we started, we all had this chance to kind of come in and walk through our schedule to find our locker, install the all-important locker shelving system that would hold my trapper keeper and my magnetic mirror, the essentials that a middle schooler in the 80s needed. Now, at some point in the event, we gathered at an open area where there was a stage for an assembly. It's eerily familiar to this moment. But at this assembly, we would have our first experience of indoctrination. It wasn't going to be one of those subtle kind of indoctrinations either, like that peer pressure that convinced us all that Z Cavarici pants were cool. They were. Or that our bangs should be teased and shaped to about a foot above our heads and then shellacked with spray paint, with gel before we left, our hairspray. And it wasn't going to be any kind of that marketing indoctrination that convinced us to get our trapper keepers, our locker shelves, or our magnetic mirrors. No, this was good, old-fashioned, mass groupthink indoctrination, and I can still remember it. SCHIMELPFENIG. I know, it sounds weird. See, it was set to the Mickey Mouse Club theme song, and it was our happy, massive gathering that we gladly repeated this to the tune and these letters over and over so that from that day forward and forevermore, we could remember where it was that we started our next step into adulthood, freshly indoctrinated with the helpful tool of spelling the place, Schimmelfinnig Middle School, where we would be for the next 3 years. And I'm reminded of this occasion now. Not so much because I'm the new kid here, and not so much because we are singing songs that many of us know, and not so much even because we are in virtually the same setup as when I learned my alma mater song. It's because we are all here, aren't we, united in a similar task? The tune kind of comes to me. INDOCTRINATION. What's that spell? Excellent. My work here is done. But in all sincerity, as we begin a new year together, I want to say a sincere thank you for all of the generous and the warm ways I've been welcomed back. I hope that in this year of ministry with you, we can continue to care for this community and our wider communities in the remarkable ways you have done so for so well for so long already. And I hope that we can engage one another and the wider world in the work of helping a hurting world. So if anyone is wondering what it is that I'll be doing here, care and community engagement, that's it. And indoctrinating people to the tune of beloved children's songs. Yes. But let's be real. Some churches have a rich history of indoctrination, and so do a lot of civic and community organizations. And there is a lot of name-calling happening right now in places where people are afraid that indoctrination is happening. In particular, public schools here in Texas. They made national news in this area recently. School districts not too far from where we are sitting are revising and revisiting old laws that require prominently displaying "In God We Trust" signs in all district buildings if that sign is donated by a member of the community. Imagine that district's surprise at the thoughtful donations and signs proclaiming this motto in Arabic, Klingon, I'm told, among others, or featuring the word God rendered in beautiful rainbow or transgender pride colors, the district had to do a little revising of their plans. And there are attempts to ban books, friends, that discuss a deeper understanding of gender in our own lives and the lives of those we love. There are even promises from some legislators to ban the mention of loving relationships of all kinds in classrooms, or don't say gay legislation. With all these and so many more comes the debate that has been raging for such a long time between two theories: indoctrination and education. But this is not the first debate in schools about what should be taught in a public institution. We are coming up on the 100-year anniversary of the arrest, imprisonment, and trial of John Scopes. In 1925, the Tennessee legislature passed a law called the Butler Act that prohibited teachers from denying the biblical account of humankind's creation in classrooms. I mean, imagine a state that would select a law from 1925 and try to enforce it on people's rights and civil liberties in that state. I'm looking at you, Mr. Paxton. Anyway, John Scopes was arrested and tried criminally for teaching from a textbook called Hunter's Biology, which was one of the first textbooks to contain portions of the theory of evolution proposed by Charles Darwin, among others. It's difficult to describe the scene in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925, a town with a population at the time of 1,800 that transformed overnight with the arrest of Scopes. In her great book, America's Religious Wars, Kathleen Sands puts not too fine a point on it by saying this: the spectacle of John Scopes being tried for teaching Hunter's civic biology was, in H.L. Mencken's words, a religious orgy. The furor, the spectacle, the drama, pick your noun, friends, over the arrest of John Scopes and his prosecution captivated the whole of a nation for quite some time. The personalities in the case were legendary, like prize fighters. In one corner, star witness for the prosecution, William Jennings Bryan, failed presidential or vice presidential candidate, waning public religious figure, grasper for legitimacy, and self-proclaimed biblical expert. And in the other corner, Clarence Darrow, staunch supporter of the First Amendment, defender of socialists and unions, champion of the newly formed ACLU, and critic of all that would silence free thought and expression. It was a trial for the ages, stuff of legend, days of testimony, hundreds of members of the press waiting on every word from every witness, travelers from hither and yon throughout the streets waiting for the verdict, and it took the jury 9 minutes to find Scopes guilty. He was fined $100 and promptly set free. Sometimes, friends, I marvel at the power of the human mind to hold at once two conflicting ideas. To uphold the principle like the freedom of speech and expression in a state's or a nation's constitution, and then to prosecute an educator for presenting the ideas contained in a book authored by an expert on their subject. That takes a lot of energy. But if you're lazy, it just takes indoctrination. It's got such a mellifluous sound. Of course, voices like William Jennings Bryan would say that the teachings of science that conflict with his interpretation of the Bible are a form of indoctrination too. And this is the heart of the centuries, the millennia-long debate between what is education and what is indoctrination. It is the debate our forebears fought with fatal consequences at times. Let us never forget that in the 16th century, when John Calvin burned or copies of On the Errors of the Trinity by physician and sometimes theologian Miguel Servetus, a work of biblical criticism that upheld the belief in one Unitarian God rather than a Trinitarian interpretation of God. One of those copies that Calvin was burning was strapped to Miguel Servetus at the time. And he suffered the pains of death for his dogged, his pugnacious, and free search for truth and meaning, who battled against forces of thought and belief that reacted with violence to a challenge of the rulers of the day who clung to power by clinging to those books they claimed held the truth. And I get it, friends. Oh, there's just something about holding a book that contains a powerful idea that those who cling to power hope to silence. I'm holding a copy of Gender Queer right now by Maya Kobabe. If you haven't read it, you probably should. It is the book that parents, administrators, and even some legislators from Oklahoma, Virginia, and other states, not too far from here, want to ban from sales at all, let alone having it be read in schools. You might have heard of a teacher in Oklahoma who came under fire for sharing a link to the Brooklyn Public Library that offers the book in electronic format, a modern-day Scopes, perhaps. And friends, this book is a lot of things. It's a work of art and literature. It's informative and really funny. It's challenging and maybe scary for some. But its heart is unmistakable. It's a love story, friends. Now, I won't give away the ending, but it's not a cloying person meets person, person loses person, person finds person love story. There's nothing wrong with those. It's so much more than that. How many times have you heard people say things like, oh, you need to practice self-love. Oh, you need to practice self-care. This is a love story about that. It is a love story about someone learning how to love themselves. All that, all this, in these pages, it's just a form of love. And it's not the only book like that. At the center of the trial of John Scopes was a book about human history. That book contained the work of Charles Darwin On the Origin of Species. And while that work certainly contained a principle of the survival of the fittest, a theory used to horrific ends in human history, in its same pages is the germination of a theory that would dominate much of Darwin's later work, a theory grounded in love. Darwin, in his later years, after falling in love himself, parenting many, many children, and losing 3 children to illness, became convinced, became fixated on love as the primary driving force for the way, the manner, and the theory of evolution. And now, speaking of evolution, I hope some of you followed the US Open of tennis this year. Okay? Okay. For those of you who didn't, I am so sorry. The great Serena Williams made perhaps her last appearance in a tennis Grand Slam event. In a widely discussed interview in Rolling Stone, the greatest of all time explains that she is not retiring from tennis, she's evolving. You do not have to know much about the life of Serena Williams to know that she already represents an evolution in the game of tennis, or in all of sport, frankly, like no one has ever accomplished before her or likely ever will again. Over and over in her interviews, she explains how much of her journey required that she love herself in ways that the world would not. And we can read what we want into that, friends, but we know how much of that need to find self-love comes from the way she is seen is treated is not treated in a sport and in a world that devalues the contributions of women of color so systematically and so pervasively that it took nothing short of a real revolution in her sport to change how all athletes are valued equally. A revolution she accomplished at her own insistence, persistence, resistance, to lift up her colleagues with a power, professionalism, and hard-won massive outpouring of love and adoration from around the world. Her example is only one of many we can see guiding us toward the kinds of revolutions this world needs. Because, friends, an arc bends. From the crucible of criticism and disdain where Unitarian thought was punished and persecuted, we know evolution. To the findings of science some hoped would be torn from the conscience of a nation, we learn evolution. To the story of Maya Kobabe that sings a song of love to oneself, shouting back against a chorus of willful ignorance and intentional misunderstanding, we feel an evolution. An arc bends, friends, all the way to the life of Miss Williams, a living, loving testament to the power, the strength, the kindness, and the fortitude it takes to change a corner of the world forever. In that arc, we know, we learn, we feel, we can almost touch the truth that proves the theory. It takes an evolution to birth a revolution. Looking backwards to laws from 1925, locking down intellectual advancement, silencing voices on the margins, that is not a revolution, because that is not an evolution. That is a revisionism, a sallow-faced imposter of revolution. And Robespierre, who knew a thing or two about bloody revolutions, the architect of the French Revolution, had something to say about revisionists. Revisionists, he says, want a revolution without a revolution. And the work is here, friends. In sponsoring a banned book read-in at Hello Dumpling in East Dallas, where you can get a free boba tea courtesy of your own WISE group here, doing the work of educating everyone, where you can read banned books, right, for an entire day. Because the only way to read banned books is fully caffeinated, friends. And if anyone needs a banned book, you can borrow mine. See, our living tradition of Unitarian Universalism is an inheritor of some of the great theological revolutions of an age. From our forebears flows the faith, the courage, and the strength to join a real revolution. A revolution to crack the foundations of ignorance and bigotry. A revolution to submerge in the task and dig deeper than any indoctrination or rote teaching could ever teach a hurting world. A revolution to touch the core deep in all of us, deep down in each of us, of the wondrous, the mysterious, the oldest songs we know, a revolution of love, a revolution that can hold us, a revolution that can teach us, a revolution that can guide us and show us the way at last to love, always to love. That's a revolution, friends. That's a real revolution. And may it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.